morning, everybody. My name is Dominic Pernay. I am with ETHOSystems, and today we have Avidxchange on the line, and they're going to go through a couple of things on their end. And Jim Talbot is with Avidxchange. He's the one that is going to present everything to you today. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them either in the chat or by using the question feature. We'll make sure that we monitor that. And looks like it's going to be about 45 minutes. But again, please, any questions that you have, feel free to post them. And once Jim is finished going through the purchase to pay automation, we will make sure that we get everything answered. Jim, please feel free to take over.
All right. Thanks for that, Tom. All right, just please let me know if at any point you can't see my screen if I have any technical issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks everyone. Appreciate you jumping on the meeting today. As far as what we'll be covering, real quick overview on Avidxchange. Avidxchange is our company name. Just want to go through who we are as a company, and then we'll walk through invoice automation. We'll get into an actual live demonstration of the TimberScan invoice product, and then we'll go through payment automation as well and take you through a workflow overview of that, and then actually get into a product demonstration of that piece. And then as Don mentioned, probably about 40-45 minutes to get through those items. And then it'll leave plenty of time for questions. If there's no questions, happy to give you a little bit of your day back. All right, Avidxchange is our company name. We're a publicly traded company. Our symbol is over here on the right. We do about 400 million a year annual revenue, but we have a sole purpose. Our single focus as an organization is accounts payable automation, and that includes invoice automation and payment automation. Our invoice and payment automation solutions for Sage 300, our products are called TimberScan and AvidPay. TimberScan was purpose-built for Sage 300, and Sage specifically, we only work with a handful of products on the TimberScan side. So we work with the Sage construction products, specifically, Sage 300 CRE today, which we'll go through. Sage 100 Contractor and Sage Intacct, if that's in your future at some point. There's a version of TimberScan that works with Intacct, and we have a migration path if you're moving from 300 or 100 over to Intacct. As far as TimberScan, all of our customers are contractors. Again, specific for construction, we have about 2,000 contractors using our product today, all various trades, general specialties, property managers, home builders, etc. A total of about 35,000 users logging into TimberScan each day. And how TimberScan works, we have about 6 steps to get through what we call the purchase to pay process. So I'm going to pick it up from the invoice side. I won't have time today to cover our purchasing product, but we do have an app where you can create POs if you wanted to start there, or if you're using Sage to create purchase orders and commitments, or perhaps Procore or some other product. You can certainly match up the invoices in TimberScan against the purchase orders. As long as that commitment is in Sage, we'll see it on the TimberScan side. As far as the invoice process, the first step is the acquire step. So somehow we have to get your invoice documents into TimberScan. The easiest way our clients are doing that today is via email. So hopefully, same for you, you're getting a good portion of your invoices via email. And what we'll do is we'll watch that email address you've given out to your vendors and subs. So as invoices come in via email, we'll extract the invoice documents that are on that email and bring those documents directly into TimberScan. For anything paper-based, you're getting regular mail, you can scan those in. You can use a dedicated scanner. You don't have to, of course. A lot of clients use copiers, multifunction devices that have a scanning option, and those work fine. And oftentimes clients have those devices set to put the scanned documents into a Windows folder. You can continue that process, no changes necessary. You can just drag and drop from that Windows folder and get the documents into TimberScan that way. But regardless of the method being used, once those documents are in TimberScan, they're automatically going to go through our OCR program. So what we're going to do is read the information that's on those invoices. So when you arrive in invoice entry, most of our clients are using dual monitors or split screen. So on one screen, they'll have the AP invoice document that was just acquired. And on the other screen, they'll have the AP invoice entry grid with a lot of the fields already pre-filled based on what TimberScan was able to read off that invoice. So we'll save you some time there, of course, with data entry and accuracy. And this is also where you'll start to see our integration with Sage. So not only are we going to connect directly to that Sage database, so you'll have access to all your vendors, jobs, and cost codes, but we're also reading the business logic on the Sage side. So if you are new to TimberScan, when you plug in TimberScan, the AP invoice entry grid that you see in TimberScan will look identical to the grid that you use in Sage today. So meaning it will have the same columns laid out in the same order on TimberScan as you have in Sage. So of course, that just makes it a lot easier for customers to transition from invoice entry in Sage to picking it up and doing it in TimberScan. You can apply the invoice against a commitment. If you do that, you'll be able to see the, the total committed amount, what's been invoiced to date, what's remaining, what's paid, things like that. The idea in this second step is you're verifying the information that the vendor billed you was accurate. So for example, if maybe the amount they billed you wasn't correct, perhaps they billed you tax and they shouldn't have. So what we fill in with the OCR are just defaults. So you can go in there and make any changes as needed. Fill in any blanks. If there was supposed to be a purchase order on their invoice and they didn't put that on there, go ahead and populate that. And once you save it here, you'll have an invoice that's now stored in TimberScan. You can track where it is. You'll have visibility of it. And we'll also, when you hit that save button, we'll also look to see if it's an invoice that you wanted to go out for approval. So construction, of course, most of our clients are doing this by job number, but you can do it by property, you can do it by GL account, by prefix, by vendor, however you like. You can also have thresholds. So we do have a lot of customers say, when the invoice goes out for approval, it just needs one approver, but perhaps if it's over a certain dollar amount, it needs to go to someone else. So all those kind of rules that you have as far as invoice routing and approval, you'll define those in TimberScan in the workflow setup. So when the invoice is saved in this second step, TimberScan will look at that workflow and send it out for approval, to the proper people down the correct path. You don't have to think about who the invoice should go to. The system will take care of that for you. On the approver side, they'll get an email when invoices are first sent to them for approval. And you don't have to worry if you enter, say, 10 jobs or 10 invoices for the same job in the same day. We're not going to bombard that person with email. They'll just get one. And then they'll go to a website. There's no app or anything they need to download. They'll just hit a website. They can view the invoices that are with them for approval. If you give them permission, they can change the information that's on that invoice. So perhaps it gets out to a project manager or a super, and they notice the cost code isn't correct. So they want to change that. If you've given them security rights to do that, they can make that change right then and there. If you have some, maybe approvers, you don't want them to do that, well, they'll be able to see the same information, but if they need to make a change, they'll have to put a note on that invoice, and then it would go to the next person in the workflow to make that change. That next person in the workflow could be the final reviewer. So this step here is actually optional, but I don't know of many clients that don't use it where, excuse me again, after the invoices come back from the approvers, they want someone in the office, whether it's accounting or admin, to review these invoices. And same idea, as a final reviewer, if I notice something is wrong, I can change it on the fly. I can kick it back into the workflow, send it back to the project manager if I prefer that they make the change. But the idea here is when this final reviewer approves it, that's going to send that invoice over to Sage 300. When the invoices come into Sage 300, you'll also be able to view the invoice documents in Sage, and I'll show that to you in a minute. But the idea here is that we store our documents in an area that's known to Sage, and you can always view these in TimberScan, of course, but if you happen to be in Sage and you want to look at an invoice document, you can do that as well. And then the last step is when it comes time to pay these invoices, this is the Avid Pay piece, and that's where you'll go through select invoices for payment in Sage, and then instead of printing checks, you create a file that gets passed back to TimberScan. So as a payment approver, a check signer, if you will, I can see the payments that are queued up to go out to a vendor. Because I use TimberScan, I can see the invoice document. I can see any purchase order documents I might have attached. I can see who approved that invoice and when. And when that looks good to me, instead of signing a check, I'm going to click a button authorizing Avidxchange to go ahead and get that vendor paid for me. All right. So I'm going to break out of PowerPoint here and start to go into the TimberScan product. But I thought first, I spoke about invoices entered in TimberScan arrive in Sage. So just into my Sage demo area real quick here. As invoices come over from TimberScan, they'll arrive as unposted. So you'll just need to post those. So at the end of the day, end of the week, you'll push a button in TimberScan. That'll send the invoices over to Sage. You post them here and you're done. If you do happen to use the change posted invoice function in Sage, so maybe it got coded to one cost code in TimberScan, it went all the way through to Sage and you posted it, and then was that point you realized it should have went to a different cost code. So you use this feature here and you change it. There's nothing you need to do on the TimberScan side. Again, we read the information that's in that Sage database, so if you went to run a report by cost code in TimberScan, we'd already have that change because again, we're reading the information that's on the Sage side. The other thing I mentioned, you can view the invoice documents in Sage. So this would just be an example of that, where if I'm in the invoice register as an example, and I'm looking at all the invoices for a certain vendor, I can highlight that invoice. So this one here is an invoice I know I sent through from TimberScan a while ago. If I click that paperclip icon, that's my access point to the invoice. So now from directly within Sage, I can see that invoice that was acquired in TimberScan. I can see the approval page. So we'll insert this for you automatically. So each of those steps I was talking about before, as far as when the invoice came in, who entered it, who approved it. If it went to multiple approvers, you would just see multiple approval boxes on this page. Who did that final review, and finally, who posted it into Sage. So this would be your view of the audit trail. You can see that right here on the invoice approval page. And then you can also view any other documents you attach to that invoice, whether it's a purchase order or a lien waiver or a receiving slip. All those documents will live with that invoice. So anytime you're looking at that invoice, you'll be able to see any of the supporting documents that go along with it. All right, so I will, excuse me, just break out of Sage here. And go into TimberScan. So when TimberScan's installed, you'll have an icon like this on your desktop. You go ahead and log in. And this is the TimberScan screen. I'm logged in as an admin, a master user. So I see everything the system has to offer here. If you're a part-time user, only use certain parts of the system. Anything you don't have access to just disappears off the tree. Again, those 5 steps I was referring to as far as acquiring the documents, invoice entry. You can do approval here in TimberScan if you like this interface, but I'll show you the web-based interface. Final review, and finally, this is the export over to Sage. So each of those items are illustrated here as tabs. And I'll just walk you through each of these, starting with the acquire step. So I did speak about acquiring via email. So when TimberScan's installed, there's some technical setup that occurs, but this would be the front end setup where your example could be like mine here. I've told the system, I don't care who sends me the email. If it comes into the email address I've given out to my vendors and subs, then this is the one we're going to watch. And as those documents come in, we'll automatically bring those into TimberScan. Now you do have the option, as I'm using here, I'm not bringing them directly into TimberScan, I'm putting them into a network folder. And the idea there is if you do have vendors that tend to send you a lot of different correspondence and not just invoices to that email address, you will have the option to go to a Windows folder where you can review what came in via email and then just drag and drop the documents if you like into TimberScan that way. You can also have somebody get copied on these emails as they come in if you wanted, someone else to see, what was coming into TimberScan as well. All right, this acquire step, I would only use this if I was scanning in documents or drag and drop. So I'm going to drag and drop one off my desktop here. And honestly, there's not a lot going on here. This is just an option or a chance to view the information that's coming in that you're bringing into TimberScan. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. There are options on the right for annotation. So if there were certain things you wanted to circle or maybe put a sticky note on, something like that, you can do those type of things with the annotations. Another thing you can do, this invoice document is 2 pages. And as you're looking at it, if you realize, these are actually 2 different invoices. They're not one 2-page invoice, they're 2 separate. So what you can do is just right click and tell the system you want to split these out. So instead of one invoice that's 2 pages, I'll now have 2 1-page invoices that are going to get acquired in the TimberScan. Down at the bottom, the invoice type, I've really just spoken about invoices so far, but it's good to know TimberScan's a full document management system, so you can use it for any type of document you like. You just define different document types, and then you can acquire those documents. You can search and retrieve them on whatever field you like. And you can also store them over in, or view them over in Sage too. So examples include owner change orders, signed subcontract agreements, W-9 forms, resumes, etc. Any document you want to use TimberScan for, just set up a different document type and acquire it. If it's an invoice, I'll just say invoice and click this process button, and that will send these 2 invoices over to invoice entry. So the invoices are now in TimberScan. What they're doing now at the moment, they're going through our OCR program, which is called Capture. And the idea with Capture is that we're going to read the information that's on these invoices. You don't have to set up templates, but I did in this case and just wanted to show you this. The idea with the template is you're defining more information than that you want the system to read when the invoice comes in from these certain vendors. So typically clients will use templates for the vendors where they're getting a lot of their invoices, kind of an 80-20 rule, if you will. If you're getting 80% of your invoices from 20% of your vendors, maybe the 20% are the ones you set up the templates for. So this would be an example of that. This is just a one-time setup. You drop a copy of a recent invoice from the supplier here, and you go through and you tell us where we can find the information that's across the top. The first thing we ask you for is the anchor, and all that is a unique identifier on the invoice. So it's actually the first thing the system reads. It'll say, oh, 36 Railroad Avenue, Albany, New York. This is Camco's invoice. So it knows to look for the invoice number in this position. So we give you these different color boxes. You just place around each of these fields. Over on the left, we'll give you a preview of what the OCR is going to read. Invoice date, same thing, just a little different color. Balance due, I do use this sample a lot in that the total, instead of being in a fixed spot on the invoice like it was for invoice date and invoice number, it floats. So that means it's just in this spot, but that's only because I have 2 line items on this invoice. If I had 5, the total might be down here somewhere. So you just go ahead and highlight anywhere we could find that invoice amount. And then over on the left, I've told it to use the invoice strategy that tells it to find the amount that's closest to the bottom. So all it does, it just reads through this entire area, grabs that amount at the bottom, and it will show you the 6550 result here. And then if there's anything else on that invoice you want to use, if you want to grab the description, if there's some fields on this vendor's invoice that you want to use to populate the description fields at invoice entry, tell us where those are. If they put your job number on there or their purchase order number, so instead of salesperson, if this was PO, we'd go ahead and grab this job status commitment number and we'd pre-fill that number. And then the only other thing I wanted to show you here real quick was just this invoice coding button. And what this does is this is where you marry this template to the corresponding supplier in Sage. So this is a lookup of the vendors I have in my Sage system. So now the system knows, oh, this is vendor 1103. And then any of these fields here from commitment on down are all just additional defaults you can use to make your life easier during invoice entry. So for me, I said, hey, Camco, everything I buy from Camco, it should always go to a job and it's always material. So my default category here is material. I used a default description instead of something off the invoice. And you could also put in a default GL account. So, if the, maybe the vendor is Staples or something like that, you could put in, say, office supplies here. So now every time we acquired an invoice from Staples, the GL account would default for me. So if I back out of that, again, the invoice comes in, it's acquired, it goes through the Capture OCR program. So when I arrive at invoice entry, this is what the invoice screen will look like. First of all, I did mention we do check the business logic that's in Sage. So if you do get these type of warnings when you enter an invoice in Sage, like the vendor's insurance is out of compliance, you'll get those same notifications in TimberScan as well. And then in this part of the screen, this is where you look at the invoice document. And down here is the coding. So this would be an example of how this invoice from Camco was acquired into TimberScan, and it's pre-populated all these fields for me down here. We use a combination of the OCR and the defaults that are in Sage. So when it comes things to like the discount or the discount date or the accounting period. We'll grab those from the Sage side. We'll grab the discount and the date, the terms from the vendor file, the current GL period, we'll grab that from Sage GL. So these will default in for me, and then everything else the system read off that invoice itself. I should mention, I did say most clients use dual monitors. So typically, I'm just on a 15-inch laptop here. Typically, clients will have dual monitors or screens, and they'll break this out so they could, have the invoice document on one screen and the invoice entry grid on the other. So they could do that side-by-side data entry and not, this scrolling that I'm doing here. All right, so this is where you're verifying the information the vendor billed you is correct. If something is incorrect, like my example here, the job number's not right, well, I'll just go in and change that. I can click the F4 button, click the list, and this will show me all the all the jobs that are in my Sage system. And I just go ahead and select the correct job. You can put a cost code on it here if you like, but you don't have to. You can leave this blank. We do have many customers where they'll know the job number, but not necessarily the cost code. They want the approver to do that. So they'll leave that blank. You click accept here. You're done with this invoice. It'll go out for approval, and then it's up to the PM to fill in the job or the cost code. All right, a couple of things I wanted to show you here. There is a history button. So this is where I can see all the AP invoices that came in for this vendor. And it doesn't matter if the invoice was entered in TimberScan or it's an invoice you entered in Sage 5 years ago. TimberScan will find it, will access that entire AP invoice history file and let you see that here. I'll also mention, any duplicates if the vendor emails you the same invoice twice. We're going to stop that. It won't even get the invoice entry. We'll trap it somewhere to catch any duplicates. If you're looking for a certain invoice, you can scroll, you can use the search like I'm doing here. If it was an invoice that was entered from TimberScan, I'll be able to see status and things like that. This invoice is fully paid, but if it was one I entered through TimberScan, the invoice documents that I could view here as well. So I could click on that view button, see the invoice, see who approved it, etc. And then when I exit out of here, it takes me right back where I was in invoice entry, so I don't lose my spot. I did speak about commitments, so this is where you can view the commitments that are associated with this vendor. So I do a lookup here. These are the 3 commitments I have for this vendor in my test area. I can go ahead and select one. It'll list the detail lines on that commitment, the value of each one, any change orders, what's been invoiced to date, paid to date, outstanding, etc. You select which line item the vendor is billing you for here, or if you select the button at the top, it'll select them all, and then it will drop those into invoice entry exactly as that commitment was entered. And then you'll notice over on the right, now you can see total committed amount, what's been invoiced to date. If you're a little over invoiced like I am here, you'll be able to see that retainage, total paid, and remaining. If you hover the mouse here, you'll get information about the job. If I hover the mouse at the cost code level, it'll let me see actual versus estimate at the code level or the category level. The approvers will have access to this as well, so if that helps them during that approval step, they'll be able to see this information too. All right, everything looks okay to the user. Go ahead and click accept, and now it's out for approval. That approver will get an email that they have invoices to approve. And just real quick before I jump to the approval portion, we do have a number of dashboards in the background that I haven't had a chance to speak about, but this will let you see, the invoices that are out by job or by vendor, et cetera. There's also a report called the invoice status report, and this will let you see everything that's in TimberScan. So in my test area here, I have 115 invoices for about $1 million that are in TimberScan, but not yet over in Sage. So this will let me see where each of those invoices are. So 2 are with Chris Audette. I have a bunch here in data entry. 28 are in final review. 28 have come through, back through the approvers and are waiting for me to approve to get over to Sage. I've got 9 with my 1 PM here, Mike McGuire. If I dig into that, then I can see the details on each of these invoices, the date they were assigned to that person, description, dollar amount, totals down here. All right, so I'm going to go into the web-based approval. And I'm just going to refresh here in case it logged me out. So this is what I would do as an approver. I would just hit a URL. I could do this from my phone. I could just have a shortcut on my phone to view the invoices that are with me. And just again, real quick, I call it an approval system, but it's much more than that. You can use it strictly for approval, but you can also expose inquiries and reports to that user. So if I'm a PM and I'm approving invoices, maybe I want to see all the invoices for a job or for a vendor. And then we have a good amount of customers have remote trailers, job sites, maybe project accountants where they're also acquiring documents in the field. They're doing invoice entry. So any of the TimberScan functions that you want to expose to this user is entirely up to you. You're not limited to approval by any means. So as far as approval, I mentioned I'll get an email when the invoices are first sent to me for approval. You can also set up reminders. So if someone hasn't looked at their invoice in 5 days, you can have the system send them an email reminder. Hey, you haven't looked at all these invoices. It'll detail each invoice. You can have some boilerplate text in that email to hopefully drive that user to go ahead and approve their invoices. As far as the approval process, it could be as easy as just clicking this approve button on the first screen here, but we do have a lot of clients ask us to remove this or hide it because they don't want the approver just coming in and going approve, approve, approve. They actually want to force them to tap into the invoice or click into it to view the documents. So that's what I've done here. I've clicked into this one invoice. Any notes you made during invoice entry, I didn't go through this, but there's a place to put in notes. So if you did make any notes, those will pop up for the user right here so they can't miss them. There's also a log button. So if I click on that, I can see, when that invoice came in, maybe if someone had approved it before me, I could see who approved it and when. And then as an approver, very simple process. I can see the invoice documents here. If I want to add an additional document, I'll hit that add page button. I'm on a laptop, so when I click that, it'll ask me to choose a file from my PC. If I'm on my phone or iPad or tablet, and I click that plus button, it'll ask me if I want to take a picture. So maybe that's an easy way to add material receipts. If the material is received in the field, the PM or whoever can just take a picture of that receipt and that'll attach here automatically. There is a remove page, a delete page button. You can have us hide that as well if you want to make sure someone doesn't delete a page or delete the invoice accidentally themselves. We can hide these for you. Over on the left are the documents. Over on the right is where the invoice was charged. And this is where we're checking security to see if the user can change anything on this invoice. So I do have that ability. So I could, say, click on the cost code if that didn't look right to me. So now the system's going back to Sage. It's retrieving the cost codes, and then I'll be able to select the cost code. I'll just go with this one here, casework. So now I've changed the cost code on this invoice. If I didn't have those security rights, all these buttons would be grayed out, and I could see where the invoice was charged, but if I wanted to make a change, I'd have to add a note or something like that. You do have these info buttons I was referring to before, so if I wanted to see how this cost code was doing, estimate versus actual, I would just touch on that to view that info. Same for the commitment. If there was a PO associated with this invoice, I could view the commitment info as well. All right, across the top, these are my action buttons. I can approve the invoice, I can reject it. If you do reject it, we'll ask you who you're rejecting it to in the workflow. So in my test area here, I have a real simple workflow. I have just one approver and one data entry person. So data entry is the only place I could go. We do force a reason. The reject button is grayed out, so I do have to put in a reason why I'm rejecting this invoice. And then after I enter a certain amount of text, this reject button becomes available. I can click on that. It'll come out of my queue. It'll record into the log. It'll go to the user that I'm rejecting it to. And this message here that I've entered will pop up for them, so they'll know why it was sent back to them. All right, everything looks okay. User clicks approve. It's on to the next person in the workflow. This process continues. If it goes to final review after that, I could do final review from the web interface. I could do it from here. So in my test area, I have 26 invoices that have gone through approval. So this is where I can view them. Any notes that that approver made during that process will pop up here for me. And then same process, looks very similar to invoice entry. Any changes I need to make, I can do those here. If I prefer, I can reject it back. I can route it, route button at the top, route it to someone else. I can attach additional documents. I have a hold button down here. So if I'm ready to send this over to Sage to update job cost in GL, but maybe I'm not ready to pay it for some reason, if you click that hold in AP button, that'll get the invoice over to Sage, but it will put it on hold, meaning that you can't pay it until you take it off of hold. Everything looks okay. I click Q for export. This invoice is now out of the workflow, and it's waiting for me here to send to Sage. So at the end of the day, end of the week, if I said yes here, this would move. In my example, I have 2 invoices ready to go over to Sage. It would move those 2 invoices over to Sage, where I would go into Sage and just post those. Okay, so that's the invoice process. I'm going to pause here for a minute, go back to PowerPoint, and then go through the payment piece. So now these invoices are in Sage, and I'm at the point where I want to pay them with AvidPay. So the way this process works, you go to Sage 300, you select the invoices you want to pay. So you're in total control of what invoices, what vendors you pay and when. The only difference is with AvidPay, instead of printing checks to an actual printer, you'll create a file, and that payment file gets moved back to TimberScan. So as a payment approver, I'll be able to see the amount of payment that's queued up to go out to the vendor, the invoice documents, the supporting documents, the approval page, etc. I'll be able to see all of that. Okay. When you approve it in AvidPay, you'll see a debit transaction hit your bank account. AvidPay will then go ahead and get your vendor paid. These are the payment options for the suppliers. Virtual card, AvidPay Direct, and AvidPay check. And just to walk through that process, so just picking it up from the Sage side, you've gone through your selection process. You've selected invoices for payment. You're at the point where you're ready to print checks. This is where AvidPay will come in. So we'll supply you with a print driver. Hopefully you can read that okay. It just says print to Avid. So it takes that information, and instead of sending it to an actual printer, it creates a file. And in that file is everything that would, print out on that check run. So the vendor name, address, invoices being paid, dollar amount, etc. All that information is saved to a file, relayed back to TimberScan. So as a payment approver, I could go through each payment individually, or I could approve all. So you do have the option, while most clients do look at each payment individually, you don't have to. You can be at this point and just tell us, hey, go ahead and approve everything. The total in this pay run is $16,677. So I can go through each one individually, or I can just say, you know what, approve all. I don't need to look at these one by one. We have other customers that don't even go through this step. They say, when I send you that file, Avid, just go ahead and get my vendors paid. Everything's approved. I don't need to go through these one by one. All right, but if you do want to go through them, you can do this by bank account. You can do it by vendor, etc. But for me, I'm just going to click Browse All. So this will start with the first payment in that pay run. I'll just make that a little bigger. So we tried to simulate a check stub here. So this would be a familiar interface to the check signer. So I could see here, that I've got a payment queued up to Kingston Plumbing for this $21.55. In my example, it's just one invoice, but if there were multiple, I would see these invoices listed down the screen here. Because I use TimberScan over on the left, I can see the invoice document. I can see who approved this invoice and when. And as that payment approver, when I think everything looks good, I want to go ahead and get Kingston Plumbing paid. Instead of signing a check, just click this approve button. Again, you can use TimberScan Go from your phone or iPad, so you don't have to be in the office to do this. You click approve, and then what happens at that point, you've authorized Avid to go ahead and get Kingston Plumbing, in my example, paid this $21.55. So what happens next is we will look to see if that supplier, so we have about 965,000 suppliers getting paid through AvidPay today. So if that vendor, Kingston Plumbing, is one of these, well, we know how they want to get paid. So on each of these vendors, we have a profile, and they've told us when I get payment from AvidPay, I want, a virtual card, I want to check, however they want to get paid. So we'll know that, and we'll just relay payment to them based on their preference. If the vendor you've authorized us to pay is not one of these 965,000, they're new, there's nothing you need to do. We'll reach out to them on your behalf, present their payment options to them, let them know there's a payment headed their way from your company, present their payment options. If we're unable to get a hold of them within 24 hours, we certainly don't want to, hold up anyone's payment or delay it. So we'll just print a check and drop it in the mail. And then we'll follow up going forward to see if they wanted to change their payment method. If the vendor has questions on their payment, well, they'll have access to a portal. So they can see payments that are headed their way, whether they're from your company or any other of their other customers using AvidPay. They'll have access to a portal to see that. If they do have questions, there is a chat and things like that, or if they wanted to change their payment method, that's also where they could initiate that process. If they do reach out to you in that AvidPay screen where I was, there's also an inquiry. So you could look up by vendor, as I did here. So Alpha Insulation is calling me, inquiring about payment status. So I did this search by vendor, and I can see, down here that they're getting paid by check. So this will just detail when the debit was requested. That means when you approve the payment to that vendor, when we printed the check, and when it was issued to the supplier. So you'll have those details here. You can relay to the vendor as well. But hopefully with that portal, you won't get as many of these payment inquiries from the vendor. Other things we do, regardless of the method chosen by the vendor for payment, this example here is a virtual card. So we'll attach this back to the invoice record itself automatically. If they got paid via check, you'd see a copy of the canceled check here. So with that invoice document, now you'd have the invoice, you'd have the approval page, you'd have any supporting documents, POs, packing slips, etc. And now you'd also have a proof of payment document attached to that as well. So anytime you looked at that invoice, you could see all of those documents. And then just to sum up, AvidPay benefits, you're in total control of your cash flow, what vendors, when you're paying them, invoices, etc. Simplify, reduce time to pay invoices, no more printing checks, putting them in envelopes, stamping them, things like that, finding the invoices that match up with each check, things like that. On the vendor side, more payment options, so they don't necessarily have to get a check. They can get a virtual card. They can get AvidPay Direct, where we're transferring the money directly to their bank account. And then as we do that, we'll also email a remittance advice so they're aware of the invoices that were paid on that amount that just hit their account. The other advantage, obviously, paper checks, they're going to go away at some point. It's been cut in half the past 5 years. So this is an opportunity to get ahead of the game, get the vendors in the mindset to receive other types of payment method. And then on your side, you'll also earn rebates, and the rebates are significant and oftentimes can offset or exceed the cost of using AvidPay. I do have customers, they're actually making money by using AvidPay. So the rebate plan is very good, and happy to discuss what your rebates would be, or go through the process to see what this would all look like at your company. But that's all I have today. I exceeded my 45 minutes a little bit here, but I do want to thank everyone for their time, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have at this point.
Thank you very much, Jim. I do not see anything in the chat currently. If we want, we can give everybody a minute to enter any questions that they might have, and we can answer them from there.
All right.
Okay, I don't see anything coming through, but Jim, thank you again. This was great. If anyone on the call does have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at info@ethosystems.com. We'll make sure that we connect you with Jim and get your questions answered. Or if there's anything else that you need, also please feel free to use that email. And thank you very much for attending today.